setting our intention. For this video. was closeted with the cardinal, and Monsieur de Treville was informed that the king was busy and could not receive him. In the evening, Monsieur de Treville attended the king's play table. The king was winning, and as the king was very avaricious, he was in an excellent humor. Thus perceiving Monsieur de Treville at a distance, "Come here, Monsieur the Captain," said he. "Come here, that I may scold you. Do you know that His Eminence has just been to make fresh complaints against your musketeers, and that with so much emotion that His Eminence is indisposed this evening? Why, these musketeers of yours are very devils." "No, sire," replied Treville, who saw at the first glance which way things would take. "No, sire, on the contrary, they are good creatures, as meek as lambs, and have but one desire. I'll be their warranty, and that is that their swords may never leave their scabbards but in your Majesty's service." "But what are they to do? The guards of Monsieur the Cardinal are forever seeking quarrels with them, and for the honor of the court even, the poor young men are obliged to defend themselves." "Listen to Monsieur de Treville," said the king. "Listen to him. I would not once say he was speaking of a religious community. In truth, my dear captain, I have a great mind to take away your commission and give it to Mademoiselle de Chimerault, to whom I promised an abbey. But don't fancy that I am going to take you on your bare word. I am called Louis the Just, Monsieur de Treville, and by and by, we will see. It is because I have a perfect reliance upon that justice that I shall wait patiently and quietly the good pleasure of your Majesty." "Wait then, Monsieur, wait," said the king. "I will not detain you long." In fact, fortune changed, and as the king began to lose what he had won, he was not sorry to find an excuse for leaving home. The king then arose a minute after, and putting the money which lay before him into his pocket, the major part of which arose from his winnings, "La Vivier," said he, "take my place. I must speak to Monsieur de Treville on an affair of importance. I had 80 louis before me. Put down the same sum, so that they who have lost may have nothing to complain of. Justice before everything." Then turning toward Monsieur de Treville and walking with him toward the embrasure of a window, "Well, Monsieur," continued he, "you say it is His Eminence's guards who have sought to quarrel with your musketeers." "Yes, sire, they always do." "And how did the thing happen? Let us see, for you know, my dear captain, a judge must hear both sides. Good Lord, in the most simple and natural manner possible, 3 of my best soldiers, whom your Majesty knows by name and whose devotedness you have more than once appreciated, and who have, I dare affirm, to the king, his service much at heart. 3 of my best soldiers, I say, and Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, had made a party of pleasure with a young cadet from Gascony, whom I had introduced to them the same morning. The party was to take place at Saint Germain, I believe, and they had appointed to meet at the Carmes de Show, when they were disturbed by Monsieur de Chassac, M. Cahusac, Picarat, and 2 other guards, who certainly did not go there in such a numerous company without some ill intention against the edicts. You incline me to think so," said the king. "There is no doubt they went thither to fight themselves. I do not accuse them, sire, but I leave your Majesty to judge what 5 armed men could possibly be going to do in such a retired spot as the environs of the convent de Cormets." "You are right, Treville, you are right." Then upon seeing my musketeers, they changed their minds and forgot their private hatred for the hatred de corps. For your Majesty cannot be ignorant that the musketeers who belong to the king and to nobody but the king are the natural enemies of the guards who belong to the cardinal. "Yes, Treville, yes," said the king in a melancholy tone, "and it is very sad, believe me, to see thus 2 parties in France, two heads to royalty. But all this will come to an end, Treville, will come to an end. You say, then, that the cardinal this is a victory," cried the king, glowing with delight. "A complete victory." "Yes, sire, as complete as that of the Bridge of Sea. 4 men, one of them wounded, and a youth, say you. One scarcely attained the age of a young man, but who, however, behaved himself so admirably on this occasion, that I will take the liberty of recommending him to your majesty." "What is his name?" "D'Artagnan, sire. He is the son of one of my oldest friends, the son of a man who served under your father of glorious memory in the partisan war." "And you say that this young man behaved himself well. Tell me how, de Treville. You know how I delight in accounts of war and fights." And Louis XVIII twisted his mustache proudly, placing his hand upon his hip. "Sire," resumed Treville, "as I told you, Monsieur D'Artagnan is little more than a boy, and he has not the honor of being a musketeer. He was dressed as a private citizen at the cards of Monsieur the Cardinal. Perceiving his youth, and still more that he did not belong to the corps, pressed him to retire before they attacked." "So you may plainly see," Treville interrupted the king, "it was they who attacked." "That is true, sire. There can be no more doubt on that head. They called upon him then to retire, but he answered that he was a musketeer at heart, entirely devoted to your majesty, and that he would therefore remain with messieurs the musketeers." "Brave young man," murmured the king. "Well, he did remain with them, and your majesty has in him so firm a champion that it was he who gave Jussac the terrible sword thrust which has made Monsieur the Cardinal so angry." He wounded Jussac," cried the king. "He, a boy? Treville, that's impossible. It says I have the honor to relate it to your majesty." "It is as I have the honor to relate it to your majesty. Jussac, one of the first swordsmen in the kingdom. Well, sire, for once he found his master. I should like to see this young man, Treville. I should like to see him, and if anything can be done, well, we will make it our business." "When will your majesty deign to perceive him?" "Tomorrow at midday, Treville." "Shall I bring him alone?" "No, bring me all 4 together. I wish to thank them all at once." "Devoted men are so rare, Treville. We must recompense devotedness. At 12 o'clock, sire, we will be at the Louvre, by the back staircase. It is useless to let the cardinal know." "Yes, sire. You understand, Treville, an edict is still an edict. It is forbidden to fight, after all. But this encounter, sire, is quite out of the ordinary conditions of a duel. It is a brawl, and the proof is that there were 5 of the cardinal's guards against my 3 musketeers. And Monsieur D'Artagnan." "That is true," said the king, "but never mind, Treville. Come still by the back staircase." Treville smiled, but as it was already something to have prevailed upon this child to rebel against his master, he saluted the king respectfully, and with this agreement took leave of him. That evening the 3 musketeers were informed of the honor which was granted them. As they had long been acquainted with the king, they were not much excited by the circumstances, but D'Artagnan, with his Gascon imagination, saw in it his future fortune and passed the night of golden dreams. As early then as 8 o'clock, he was at the apartment of Athos. D'Artagnan found the musketeer dressed and ready to go out. As the hour of wait upon the king was not still 12, he had made a party with Porthos and Aramis to play a game of tennis in a tennis court situated near the stables of the Luxembourg. Athos invited D'Artagnan to follow them, and although ignorant of the game, which he had never played, he accepted the invitation, not knowing what to do with his time from 9 o'clock in the morning, as it then scarcely was till 12. The 2 musketeers were already there and were playing together. Athos, who was very expert in all bodily exercises, passed with D'Artagnan to the opposite side and challenged them, but at the first effort he made, although he played with his left hand, he found that his wound was yet too recent to allow of such exertion. D'Artagnan remained, therefore, alone, and as he declared he was too ignorant of the game to play it regularly, they only continued giving balls to each other without counting. But one of these balls, launched by Porthos's Herculean hand, passed so close to D'Artagnan's face that he thought if, instead of passing near, it had hit him resume the game until he should be prepared to play with them on more equal terms, and he went and took his place near the court and in the gallery. Unfortunately for D'Artagnan, among the operators was one of the Eminence's guards, who was still irritated by the defeat of his companions, which had happened only the day before, had promised himself to seize the first opportunity of avenging it. He believed this opportunity was now come, and addressing his neighbor, "It is not astonishing," said he, "that the young man should be afraid of a ball. He is doubtless a musketeer apprentice." D'Artagnan turned round as if a serpent had stung him, and fixed his eyes intently upon the guard who had just made this insolent speech. "Pardieu," resumed the latter, twisting his mustache, "look at me as long as you like, my little gentleman. I have said what I have said." "And as since that which you have said, is it too clear to require any explanation?" replied D'Artagnan in a low voice. "I beg you will follow me." "And when?" asked the guard with the same jeering air. "Immediately, if you please, and you know I am without doubt." "I know, I assure you, I am completely ignorant, nor does it much concern me. You're in the wrong there, for if you knew my name, perhaps you would not be in such a hurry." "What is your name, then?" "Bernajois, at your service." "Well then, Monsieur Bernajois," said D'Artagnan quietly, "I will wait for you at the door." "Go on, monsieur, I will follow you." "Do not appear to be in a hurry, monsieur, so as to cause it to be observed that we go out together. We must be aware that for that which we have had in hand company would be inconvenient." "That's true," said the guard, astonished that his name had not produced more effect upon the young man. In fact, the name of Bernajois was known to everybody, D'Artagnan alone excepted, perhaps, for it was one of them which figured most frequently in the daily brawls which all the edicts of the cardinal had not been able to repress. Porthos and Aramis were so engaged with their game, and Athos was watching them with so much attention that they did not even perceive their young companion go out, who, as he had told his Eminence's guard he would, stepped outside the door. An instant after, the guard descended, as D'Artagnan had no time to lose, on account of the audience of the king, which was fixed for midday. He cast his eyes around, and seeing that the street was empty, "Ma foi," said he to his adversary, "it is fortunate for you, although your name is Bernajois, to have only to deal with an apprentice musketeer. Never mind, be content, I will do my best. Guard." "But," said he whom D'Artagnan had thus provoked, "it appears to me that this place is very ill chosen, and that we should be better behind the Abbey Saint-Germain, or in the Bureau Clerks." "What you say is very sensible," replied D'Artagnan, "but unfortunately I have very little time to spare. I have an appointment at 12 precisely." "Grand, then, monsieur. Guard, then, monsieur. Guard." Bernajois was not a man to have such a compliment paid to him twice. In an instant his sword glittered in his hand, and he sprang upon his adversary, whom from his youth he hoped to intimidate. But D'Artagnan had on the preceding day gone through his apprenticeship, fresh, sharpened by his victory, full of the hopes of future favor. He was resolved not to give back a step. So the two swords were crossed close to the hilts, and D'Artagnan stood firm. It was his adversary who made the retreating step. But D'Artagnan seized the moment at which, in this movement, the sword of Bernajois deviated from the line. He freed his weapon, made a lunge, and touched his adversary on the shoulder. D'Artagnan immediately made a step backward and raised his sword, but Bernajois cried out that it was nothing, and rushing blindly upon him, absolutely spitted himself upon D'Artagnan's sword. As, however, he did not fall away, as he did not declare himself conquered, but only broke away toward the hotel of Monsieur de Tremouille. Monsieur de Tremouille, in whose service he had a relation. D'Artagnan was ignorant of the seriousness of the latest wound his adversary had received, pressed him warmly, and without doubt would soon have completed his work with the third blow, when the noise which arose from the street being heard in the tennis courts, two of his friends of the guards who had seen him go out after exchanging some words with D'Artagnan rushed cries all over the hotel rushed out, falling upon the 4 companions who on their side cried aloud to the rescue musketeers. This cry was generally attended to, for the musketeers were known to be enemies of the cardinal and were beloved on account of the hatred they bore before these enemies. Thus the guards of other companies than those which belonged to the Red Duke, as Aramis had called him in general in these quarrels, took part with the king's musketeers. Of 3 guards of the company of Monsieur de Seart, who were passing, 2 came to the assistance of the 4 companions, while the other ran toward the hotel of Monsieur de Treville, crying, "To the rescue, musketeers, to the rescue!" As usual, this hotel was full of soldiers of this corps who hastened to the succor of their comrades. This cry was generally attended to, for the musketeers were known to be enemies of the cardinal and were beloved on account of the hatred they bore to his enemies. Thus the guards of other companies than those which belonged to the guards to Red Duke, as Aramis had called him, in general in these quarrels took part with the king's musketeers. Of 3 guards of the company of Monsieur de Seart, who were passing, 2 came to the assistance of the 4 companions, while the other ran toward the hotel of Monsieur de Treville, crying, "To the rescue, musketeers, to the rescue!" As usual, this hotel was full of soldiers of this corps who hastened to the succor of their comrades. The melee became general, but strength was on the side of the musketeers. The cardinal's guards and Monsieur de la Tremouille's people retreated into the hotel, the doors of which they closed just in time to prevent their enemies from entering with them. As to the wounded man, he had been taken in at once, and as we have said, in a very bad state. Excitement was at its height among the musketeers and their allies, and they even began to deliberate whether they should not set fire to the hotel to punish the insolence of Monsieur de la Tremouille's domestics in daring to make a sortie upon the king's musketeers. The proposition had been made and resolved with enthusiasm when, fortunately, 11 o'clock struck. D'Artagnan and his companions remembered their audience, and as they would very much have regretted that such a feat should be performed without them, they succeeded in quieting their coadjutors. The latter contented themselves with hurling some paving stones against the gates, but the gates were too strong. They then grew tired of the sport. Besides, those who must be considered as the leaders of the enterprise had quitted the group and were making their way toward the hotel of Monsieur de Treville, who was waiting for them, already informed of this fresh disturbance. "Quick to the Louvre," said he to the Louvre, without losing an instant, "and let us endeavor to see the king before he is prejudiced by the cardinal. We will describe the thing to him as a consequence of the affair of yesterday, and the 2 will pass off together." Monsieur de Treville, accompanied by his 4 young men, directed his course toward the Louvre. But, to the great astonishment of the captain of the musketeers, he was informed the king has gone stag hunting in the forest of Saint-Germain. Monsieur de Treville required this intelligence to be repeated to him twice, and each time his companion saw his brow become darker. Had his majesty asked any intention of holding this hunting party yesterday? "No, your excellency," replied the valet de chambre. "The Grand Vizier came this morning to inform him that he had marked down a stag. He at first answered that he would not go, but could not resist his love of sport and set out after dinner." "Has the king seen the cardinal?" asked Monsieur de Treville. "Most probably he has," replied the valet de chambre, "for I saw the horses harnessed to his eminence's carriage this morning, and when I asked where he was going, I was told to Saint-Germain. He is beforehand with us," said Monsieur de Treville. "Gentlemen, I will see the king this evening, but as to you, I do not advise you to risk doing so." This advice was too reasonable, and moreover came from a man who knew the king well. To allow the 4 young men to dispute it, Monsieur de Treville recommended them each to retire to his apartment and wait for news from him. On entering the hotel, Monsieur de Treville thought it best to be first in making the complaint. He sent one of his servants to Monsieur de la Tremouille with a letter in which he begged of him to eject the cardinal's guard from his house and to reprimand his people sortie against the king's musketeers. But Monsieur de la Tremouille, already prejudiced by his esquire, whose relation, as we already know, Bourgeois was, replied that it was neither for Monsieur de Treville nor the musketeers to complain, but on the contrary, he whose people the musketeers had assaulted in his hotel they had endeavored to burn. Now, as the debate between these two nobles might last a long time, each becoming naturally more firm in his own opinion, Monsieur de Treville thought of an expedient which might terminate it quietly, which was to go himself to Monsieur de la Tremouille. Well, Monsieur, let us go to him. Let us adjure him in the name of the God before whom he is called upon, perhaps quickly to appear to speak the truth. I will take him for judge in his own cause, Monsieur, and will believe what he will say. Monsieur de la Tremouille reflected for an instant, then, as it was difficult to make a more reasonable proposal, agreed to it. Both descended to the chamber in which the wounded man lay. The latter, on seeing these two noble lords who came to visit him, endeavored to raise himself up in his bed, but he was too weak, and exhausted by the effort, he fell back again, almost insensible. Monsieur de la Tremouille approached him and made him respire some salts, which recalled him to life. Then Monsieur de Treville, unwilling that it should be thought that he had influenced the wounded man, requested Monsieur de la Tremouille to interrogate him himself. That which Monsieur de Treville had foreseen happened, placed between life and death as Bourgeois was. He had no idea for a moment of concealing the truth, and he described to the two nobles the affair exactly as it had passed. This was all that Monsieur de Treville wanted. He wished Bourgeois a speedy recovery, took leave of Monsieur de la Tremouille, returned to his hotel, and immediately sent word to the four friends that he awaited their company to dinner. Monsieur de Treville received very good company, quite anti-cardinalist though. It may easily be understood, therefore, that the conversation during the whole of dinner turned upon the two checks that his eminence's guards had received it. Now, as D'Artagnan had been the hero of these two fights, it was upon him that all the fallacious failed which Athos, Porthos, and Aramis abandoned to him, not only as good comrades, but as men who had so often had their turn that they could very well afford him his. Towards 6 o'clock, Monsieur de Treville announced that it was time to go to the Louvre, but as the hour of audience granted by His Majesty was past, instead of claiming the entree by the back stairs, he placed himself with the four young men in the antechamber. The king was not yet returned from hunting. Our young men had been waiting about half an hour, mingled with the crowd of courtiers, when all the doors were thrown open, and His Majesty was announced. At this announcement, D'Artagnan felt himself tremble to the very marrow of his bones. The instant which was about to follow would, in all probability, decide his future life. His eyes, therefore, were fixed in a sort of agony upon the door through which the king would pass. Louis XVIII appeared, walking past as he was in hunting costume, covered with dust, wearing large boots, and had a whip in his hand. At the first glance, D'Artagnan judged that the mind of the king was stormy. This disposition, visible as it was in His Majesty, did not prevent the courtiers from ranging themselves upon his passage. In royal antechambers, it is better to be looked upon with an angry eye than not to be looked upon at all. The Three Musketeers, therefore, did not hesitate to make a step forward. D'Artagnan, on the contrary, remained concealed behind them, but although the king knew Athos, Porthos, and Aramis personally, he passed before them without speaking or looking, indeed, as if he had never seen them before. As for Monsieur de Treville, when the eyes of the king fell upon him, he sustained the look with so much firmness that it was the king who turned aside, after which His Majesty, grumbling, entered his apartment. Matters go but badly, said Athos, smiling, and we shall not be made knights of the order this time. enjoyed the pleasures of the chase today. A fine pleasure indeed, monsieur. Upon my soul, everything degenerates, and I don't know whether it is the game. It is the game. Leaves no scent, or the dogs that have no noses. We started a stag of 10 times. We chased him for 6 hours. And when he was near being taken, when St. Simon was already putting his horn to his mouth to sound the ally, crack all the pack, takes the wrong scent and sets off after a 2 time. I shall be obliged to give up hunting, as I have given up hawking. I am an unfortunate king, Monsieur de Treville. I had but one gerfalcon, and he died the day before yesterday. Indeed, sire, I enter into your annoyance perfectly. The misfortune is great, but I think you have still a good number of falcons, sparrowhawks, and tergits, and not a man to instruct them. Falconers are declining. I know no one but myself who is acquainted with the noble art of venery. After me it will be all over, and people will hunt with gins, snares, and traps. If I had but the time to form pupils. But there is Monsieur le Cardinal, always at hand, who does not leave me a moment's repose, who talks to me perpetually about Spain, about Austria, about England. Propos mon, Monsieur le Cardinal, Monsieur de Treville, I am vexed with you. This was the place at which Monsieur de Treville waited for the king. He knew the king of old, and he knew that all these complaints were but a preface, a sort of excitation to encourage himself, and that he had now come to his point at last. And in what have I been so unfortunate to displease your majesty? Asked Monsieur de Treville, feigning the most profound astonishment. Is it thus you perform your charge, monsieur? Continued the king, without directly replying to de Treville's question. Is it for this I name you captain of my musketeers, that they should assassinate a man, disturb a whole quarter, and endeavor to set fire to Paris without your saying a word? But yet, continued the king, without doubt my haste accuses you wrongfully. Without doubt the rioters are in prison, and you come to tell me justice is done. Sire, replied Monsieur de Treville calmly, I come to demand it of you. And against whom, pray? Cried the king. Against calumniators, said Monsieur de Treville. Ah, this is something new, replied the king. Will you tell me that your three damned musketeers, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and your cadet from Béarn have not fallen like so many friends upon poor Bernajoux, and have not maltreated him in such a fashion that probably by this time he is dead? Will you tell me that they did not lay siege to the hotel of the Duc de la Trémoille, and that they did not endeavor to burn it, which would not perhaps have been a great misfortune in time of war, seeing that it is nothing but a nest of Huguenots, but which is in time of peace a frightful example? Tell me now, can you deny all of this? And who has told you this fine story, sire? Asked de Treville quietly. Who has told me this fine story, monsieur? Who should it be but him who watches while I sleep, who labors while I amuse myself, who conducts everything at home and abroad, in Europe as well as in France? Your majesty must speak of God, without doubt, said Monsieur de Treville, for I know no one but God that can be so far above your majesty. No, monsieur, I speak of the prop of the state, of my only servant, of my only friend, of Monsieur le Cardinal. The eminence is not his holiness, sire. His eminence is not his holiness, sire. What do you mean by that, monsieur? That it is only the Pope that is infallible, and that this infallibility does not extend to the cardinals. You mean to say that he deceives me? You mean to say that he betrays me? You accuse him then? Come, speak, confess freely that you accuse him. No, sire, but I say that he deceives himself. I say that he is ill-informed. I say that he has hastily accused your majesty's musketeers, towards whom he is unjust, and that he has not obtained his information from good sources. The accusation comes from Monsieur de la Trémoille, from the Duke himself. What do you answer to that? I might answer, sire, that he is too deeply interested in the question to be a very impartial evidence. But so far from that, sire, I know the Duke to be a loyal gentleman, and I refer the matter to him, but upon one condition, sire. What is that? It is that your majesty will make him come here, will interrogate him yourself. Tete-a-tete, without witness. And then I shall see your majesty as soon as you have seen his I sometimes dream, that's all. Come then as early as you like at 7 o'clock, but beware if you and your musketeers are guilty. If my musketeers are guilty, sire, the guilty shall be placed in your majesty's hand, or will dispose of them as your good pleasure. Does your majesty require anything further? Speak, I am ready to obey. No, monsieur, no. I am not called Louis the Just without reason. Tomorrow then, monsieur, tomorrow. Till then, God preserve your majesty. Till then, however ill the king might sleep, Monsieur de Treville slept still worse. He had ordered his 3 musketeers and their companion to be with him at 6:30 in the morning. He took them with him without encouraging them or promising them anything, and without concealing from them that their favor and even his own depended upon this cast of the dice. When arrived at the bottom of the back stairs, he desired them to wait. If the king was still irritated against them, they would depart without being seen. If the king consented to see them, they would only have to be called. On arriving at the king's private antechamber, Monsieur de Treville found La Chesnay, who informed him that they had not been able to find Monsieur de la Tremay on the preceding evening at his hotel, and he came too late to present himself at the Louvre, that he had only the moment arrived, and then he was then with the king. This circumstance pleased Monsieur de Treville much, as he thus became certain that no foreign suggestion could insinuate itself between Monsieur de la Tremay's deposition and himself. In fact, 10 minutes had scarcely passed away when the door of the king's closet opened and Monsieur de Treville saw Monsieur de la Tremay come out, and the Duke came straight up to him and said, Monsieur de Treville, His Majesty has just sent for me in order to inquire respecting the circumstances which took place yesterday at my hotel. I have told him the truth, that it is to say that the fault lay with my people, and that I was ready to offer you my excuses. Since I have the good fortune to meet you, I beg you to receive them and to consider me always as one of your friends. Monsieur de le Duc, said Monsieur de Treville, I was confident of your loyalty, that I required no other defender before His Majesty than yourself. I find that I have not been mistaken, and I am gratified to think that there is still one man in France who may be said without disappointment what I have said of you. That's well said, said the king, who had heard all these compliments through the open door. Only tell him, Treville, since he wishes to be considered as your friend, that I also wish to be one of his, but he neglects me. That it is nearly 3 years since I have seen him, and that I never do see him unless I send for him. Tell him all this for me, for these are things which a king cannot say by himself. Thanks, sire, thanks, said Monsieur de la Tremay, but your Majesty may be assured that it is not those, and do not speak of Monsieur de Treville, that it is not those whom your Majesty sees at all hours of the day that are the most devoted to you. Ah, you heard what I said. So much the better, Duke, so much the better. And the king, advancing toward the door, that's you, Treville. Where are your musketeers? I told you the day before yesterday to bring them with you. Why have you not done so? They are below, sire, and with your permission, La Chesnay will tell them to come up. Yes, let them come up immediately. It is nearly 8 o'clock, and at 9 I expect a visit. Go, Monsieur le Duc, and return once. Come in, Treville. The Duke bowed and retired. At the moment he opened the door, the 3 musketeers and D'Artagnan, conducted by La Chesnay, appeared at the top of the staircase. Come in, my braves, said the king. Come in, I am going to scold you. The musketeers advanced, bowing, but D'Artagnan following closely behind. Now the devil, continued the king. 7 of his eminence's guards placed were to combat by your 4 in 2 days. As too many, gentlemen, too many. If you go on so, His Eminence will be forced to renew his company in 3 weeks, and I to put the edicts in force in all their rigor. One now and then I don't say much about, but 7 in 2 days, I repeat, it is too many, it is far too many. Therefore, sire, your Majesty sees that they come quite contrite and repentant to offer you their excuses. Quite contrite and repentant, said the king, I place no confidence in their hypocritical faces, and particularly there is one yonder of a Gascon look. Come hither, monsieur. D'Artagnan, who understood that it was to him this compliment was addressed, approached, assuming a most deprecating air. if he had not rescued me from the hands of Kawasaki. I should not now have the honor of making my very humble references to your majesty. Why, this Bernois is a very devil, and Ventres and Gray, Monsieur de Treville, as the king my father would have said. But as this sort of work, many doublets must be slashed, and many swords broken. Now Gascons are always poor, are they not? Sire, I can assert that they have hitherto discovered no gold mines in their mountains, though the Lord owes them this miracle in recompense of the manner in which they supported the pretensions of the king your father. Which is to say that the Gascons made a king of me myself, saying that I am my father's son, is it not, Treville? Well, in good faith, I don't say nay to it. Lashes nay, go and see if by rummaging in all my pockets you can find 40 pistols, and if you can find them, bring them to me. And now let us see, young man, with your hand upon your conscience, how did all this come to pass? D'Artagnan related the adventure of the preceding day in all its details, how not having been able to sleep for the joy he felt in the expectation of seeing his majesty, he had gone his 3 friends 3 hours before the hour of audience. How they had gone together to the 5's court, and how upon the fear he had manifested of receiving a ball in the face, he had been cheered up by Bernajois, who had nearly paid for his cheer with his life, and Monsieur de la Tremouille, who had nothing to do with the matter, with the loss of his hotel. This is all very well, murmured the king. Yes, this is just the account the Duke gave me of the affair. Poor Cardinal, 7 men in 2 days, and those of his very best. But that's quite enough, gentlemen. Please to understand that's enough. And how upon the fear he had manifested of receiving a ball in his face, he had been cheered up by Bernajois, who had nearly paid for his life with it, for the cheer with his life. And Monsieur de la Tremouille, who had nothing to do with the matter, with the loss of his hotel. This is all very well, murmured the king. Yes, this is just the account the Duke gave me of the affair. Poor Cardinal, 7 men in 2 days, and those of his very best. But that's quite enough, gentlemen, please to understand. That's enough. You have taken your revenge for the Rue Ferreau, and even exceeded it. Yon ought to be satisfied. If your majesty is so, said Treville, we are. Oh, yes, I am, added the king, taking a handful of gold from La Chesnay and putting it into the hands of D'Artagnan. Here, said he, is a proof of my satisfaction. At this period, the ideas of pride, which are in fashion in our days, did not yet prevail. A gentleman received from hand to hand money from the king, and was not the least in the world humiliated. D'Artagnan put his 40 pistols in his pocket without any scruple, on the contrary, thanking his majesty greatly. There, said the king, looking at a clock, there now, as it is 8:30, you may retire, for as I told you, I expect someone at 9. Thanks for your devotedness, gentlemen. I may continue to rely upon it, may I not? Oh, sir, cried the 4 companions with one voice, we would allow ourselves to be cut to pieces in your majesty's service. Well, but keep whole. That will be better, and you will be more useful to me. Treville, added the king in a low voice, as the others were retiring, as you have no room in the musketeers, and as we have besides decided that a novitiate is necessary before entering that court, place this young man in the company of the guards of Monsieur Desarts, your brother-in-law. Ah, pardieu, I enjoy beforehand the face the cardinal will make. He will be furious, but I don't care. I am doing what is right. And the king waved his hand to Treville, who left him and rejoined the musketeers, whom he found sharing the 40 pistols astonished by Porthos. He was a Picard whom the glorious musketeer had picked up on the bridge de la Tournelle, making his rounds and spitting in the water. Porthos pretended that this occupation was a proof of a reflective and contemplative organization, and he had brought him away without any other recommendation. The noble carriage of this gentleman, on whose account he believed himself to be engaged, had seduced Planchet. That was the name of the Picard. He felt a slight disappointment, however, when he saw that the place was already taken by a compeer named Mousqueton, and when Porthos signified to him that the state of this household, though great, would not support 2 servants, and that he must enter into the service of D'Artagnan. Nevertheless, when he waited at the dinner given by his master and saw him take out a handful of gold to pay for it, he believed his fortune made, and returned thanks to heaven for having thrown him into the service of such a Croesus. He preserved this opinion even after the feast, with the remnants of which he repaired his long abstinences. But when in the evening he made his master's bed, the chimeras of Planchet faded away. The bed was the only one in his apartments. In the apartments, which consisted of an antechamber and a bedroom, Planchet slept in the antechamber upon a coverlet taken from the bed of D'Artagnan, and which D'Artagnan from that time made shift without. Athos, on his part, had a valet whom he had trained in his service in a perfectly peculiar fashion, and who was named Grimaud. He was very taciturn, this worthy signor. Be it understood, we are speaking of Athos. During the 5 or 6 years that he had lived in the strictest intimacy with his companions, Porthos and Aramis, they could remember having often seen him smile, but never heard him laugh. His words were brief and expressive, conveying all that was meant and no more. No embellishments, no embroidery, no arabesques. His conversation was a fact without any episodes. Although Athos was scarcely 30 years old and was of great personal beauty and intelligence of mind, no one knew that he had ever had a mistress. He never spoke of women. He certainly did not prevent others from speaking of them before him, although it was easy to perceive that this kind of conversation, in which he only mingled by bitter words and misanthropic remarks, was perfectly disagreeable to him. His reserve, his roughness, and his silence made him almost an old man of him. He had then, in order not to disturb his habits, accustomed Grimaud to obey him upon a single gesture or upon the mere movement of his lips. He never spoke to him but upon most extraordinary occasions. Sometimes Grimaud, who feared his master as he did fire while entertaining a strong attachment to his person, and a great veneration for his talents, believed he perfectly understood that what he wanted, flew to execute the order received, and did precisely the contrary. Athos then shrugged his shoulders, and without putting himself in a passion, gave Grimaud a good thrashing. On these days he spoke a little. Porthos, as we have seen, was of character exactly opposite to that of Athos. He not only talked much, but he talked loudly, little caring, we must render him that justice whether anybody listened to him or not. He talked for the pleasure of talking, and for the pleasure of hearing himself talk. He spoke upon all subjects, except the sciences, alleging in his respect the inveterate hatred he had borne to the learned from his childhood. He had not so noble an air as Athos, and the consciousness of his inferiority in this respect had, at the commencement of their intimacy, often rendered him unjust toward that gentleman whom he endeavored to eclipse by his splendid dress. But with the simple musketeer's uniform, and nothing but the manner in which he threw back his head and advanced his foot, Athos instantly took the place which was due, and consigned the ostentatious Porthos to the second rank. Bon fortunes, of which Athos never spoke, and at the present moment, after having passed from the noble of the robe to the noble of the sword, from the lawyer's dame to the baroness, there was a question of nothing less with Porthos than a foreign princess who was enormously fond of him. An old proverb says, like master, like man. Let us pass then from the valet of Athos to the valet of Porthos, from Grimaud to Mousqueton. Mousqueton was a Norman, whose specific name of Boniface, his master, had changed into the infinitely more sonorous one of Mousqueton. He had entered Porthos's service upon condition that he should only be clothed and lodged, but in a handsome manner. He claimed but 2 hours a day to himself to consecrate to an employment which would provide for his other wants. Porthos agreed to the bargain. The thing suited him wonderfully well. He had doublets for Mousqueton cut out of his old clothes and cast-off cloaks, and thanks to a very intelligent tailor who made his clothes look as good as new by turning them, and whose wife was suspected of wishing to make Porthos descend from his aristocratic habits, Mousqueton made a very good figure when attending on his master. As for Aramis, of whom we believe we have insufficiently explained the character, a character besides which, like that of his companions, we shall be able to follow in its development, his lackey was called Bazin. Thanks to the hopes which his master entertained of some day entering into orders, he was always clothed in black, as became the servant of a churchman. This was a Bergeron of from 35 to 40 years of age, mild, peaceable, sleek, employing the leisure his master left him in the perusal of pious works, providing rigorously for two, a dinner of few dishes, but excellent. For the rest, he was dumb, blind, and deaf, and of impeachable fidelity. And now that we are acquainted superficially, at least, with the masters and the valets, let us pass on to the dwellings occupied by each of them. Athos dwelt in the Rue Ferreux. Within 2 steps of the Luxembourg, his apartment consisted of 2 small chambers very nicely fitted up in a furnished house, the hostess of which, still young and still really handsome, cast tender glances uselessly at him. Some fragments of great past splendor appeared here and there upon the walls of his modest lodging, a sword, for example, which believed by its make to the times of Francis I, the hilt of which alone, encrusted with precious stones, might be worth 200 pistoles, and which nevertheless, in his moments of greatest distress, although he had never pledged nor offered for sale, this sword had long been an object of ambition for Porthos. Porthos would have given 10 years of his life to possess this sword. One day, when he had an appointment with the Duchess, he endeavored even to borrow it of Athos. Athos, without saying anything, emptied his pockets, got together all of his jewels, purses, aiguilles, and gold chains, and offered them to all of Porthos. But as to the sword, he said it was sealed to its place, and should never quit it until its master should himself quit his lodgings. In addition to the sword, there was a portrait representing a nobleman of the time of Henry VIII, dressed with the greatest elegance, and who were the order of the Holy Ghost, and this portrait had with Athos certain resemblances of lines, certain family likeness, which indicated that this great noble, a knight of the orders of the king, was his ancestor. Besides these, a casket of magnificent goldsmith's work, with the same arms as the sword in the portrait, formed a middle ornament to the mantelpiece, which assorted badly with the rest of the furniture. Athos always carried the key of this coffee about him, but the one day opened it before Porthos, and Porthos was convinced that this coffer contained nothing but letters and papers, love letters and family papers, no doubt. Porthos lived in Porthos raised his head and his hand and said, "That is my abode." But he was never to be found at home. He never invited anybody to go up with him, and no one could form an idea of what these sumptuous apartments contained in the shape of real riches. As to Aramis, he dwelt in a little lodging composed of a boudoir, an eating room, and a bedroom, which room, situated as the others were on the ground floor, looked out upon a little fresh green garden, shady and impenetrable to the eyes of his neighbors. With regard to D'Artagnan, we know he was lodged, and we have already made acquaintance with his lackey, Master Planchet. D'Artagnan, who was by nature very curious as people generally are who possess the genius of intrigue, did all he could to make out who Athos, Porthos, and Aramis really were. For under these nom de guerre, each of these young men concealed his family name. Athos, in particular, who savored of the noble a league off. He addressed himself then to Porthos to gain information respecting Athos and Aramis, and to Aramis in order to learn something of Porthos. Fortunately, Porthos knew nothing of the life of the silent companion but that which had transpired. It was said that a frightful treachery had forever poisoned the life of the gallant young man. What could this treachery be? All the world was ignorant of it. As to Porthos, except his real name, which no one but Monsieur de Treville was acquainted with, as well as with those of his two comrades, his life was very easily known. Vain and indiscreet, it was easy to see through him as through a crystal. The only thing to mislead the investigator would have been for him to believe all the good he said of himself. With respect to Aramis, while having the air of having nothing secret about him, he was a young fellow made up of mysteries, answering little to questions put to him about others, and eluding those that concerned himself. One day D'Artagnan, having for a long time interrogated him about Porthos, and having learned from him the report which prevailed concerning the bonne fortune of the Musketeer with the princess, wished to gain a little insight into the amorous adventures of his interlocutor. "And you, my dear companion," said he, you who speak of the baroness, countesses, and princesses of others. Pardieu, I spoke of them because Porthos talked of them himself, because he has cried all of these fine things before me. But he assured my dear Monsieur D'Artagnan that if I had obtained them from any other source, or if they had been confided to me, there exists no confessor more discreet than I am. "Oh, I don't doubt that," replied D'Artagnan, "but it seems to me that you are tolerably familiar with coats of arms, a certain embroidered handkerchief, for instance, to which I owe the honor of your acquaintance." This time Aramis was not angry, but assumed the most modest air, and replied in a friendly tone, "My dear friend, do not forget that I wish to belong to the church, and that I avoid all mundane opportunities. The handkerchief you saw had not been given to me, but it had been forgotten and left at my house by one of my friends. I was obliged to pick it up in order not to compromise him and the lady he loves. As for myself, I neither have nor desire to have a mistress, following in that respect the very judicious example of Athos, who is none any more than I have. But what the devil, you are not an abbé, you are a musketeer." "A musketeer for a time, my friend, as the cardinal says, a musketeer against my will, but a churchman at heart. Believe me, Athos and Porthos dragged me into this to occupy me. I had at the moment of being ordained a little difficulty with, but that would not interest you, and I am taking up your valuable time." "Oh, not at all. It interests me very much," cried D'Artagnan, "and at this moment I have absolutely nothing to do." "Yes, but I have my Saint Honor in order to purchase some rogue for Madame de Chevreau. So you see, my dear friend, that if you are not in a hurry, I am. And Aramis held out his hand in a cardinal manner to his young companion, and took leave of him. Notwithstanding all the pains he took, D'Artagnan was unable to learn any more concerning his young friends. He formed, therefore, the resolution of believing in the present all that was said of their past, hoping for more certain and extended revelations from the future. In the meanwhile, he looked upon Athos as an Achilles, Porthos as an Ajax, and Aramis as a Joseph. As to the rest, the life of our four young friends was joyous enough. Athos played, and that generally, unfortunately. Nevertheless, he never borrowed a son of his companions, although his purse was ever at their service, and when he had played upon honor, he always awakened his creditor by 6 o'clock the next morning to pay the debt of the preceding evening. Porthos played by fits. On the days he won, he was insolent and ostentatious. If he lost, he disappeared completely for several days, after which he reappeared with a pale face and thinner person, but with money in his purse. As to Aramis, he never played. He was the worst musketeer and the most unconvivial companion imaginable. He had always something or other to do. Sometimes in the midst of dinner, when everyone, under the attraction of wine and in the warmth of conversation, believed they had 2 or 3 hours longer to enjoy themselves at table, Aramis looked at his watch, arose with a bland smile, and took leave of the company, to go, as he said, to consult a casuist with whom he had an appointment. At other times he would return home to write a treatise, and requested his friends not to disturb him. At this, Athos would smile with his charming melancholy smile, which so became this noble countenance, and Porthos would drink, swearing that Aramis would never be anything but a village curé. Planchet, D'Artagnan's valet, supported his good fortune nobly. He received 30 sons per day, and during a month he returned home gay as a chaffinch and affable toward his master. When the wind of adversity began to blow upon the housekeeping of Rue de Fosseilles, that is to say, when the 40 pistols of King Louis XIII were consumed, or nearly so, he commenced complaints which Athos thought nauseous, Porthos unseemly, and Aramis ridiculous. Athos advised D'Artagnan to dismiss the fellow. Porthos was of opinion that he should give him a good thrashing first, and Aramis contended that a master should never attend to anything but the civilities paid him. "This is all very easy for you to say," replied D'Artagnan, "for you, Athos, who live like a dumb man, with Grimaud, who forbid him to speak, and consequently never exchange ill words with him. For you, Porthos, who carry matters in such magnificent style, and are a god for your valet Mousqueton, and for you, Aramis, who always abstracted by your theological studies, inspire your servant Bazin, a mild religious man, with a profound respect. But for me, who am without any settled means and without resources, for me, who am neither a musketeer nor even a guard, what am I to do to inspire either affection, terror, or respect in Planchet?" "The thing is serious," answered the 3 friends. "It is a family affair. It is with valets, and as with wives, they must be placed at once upon the footing in which you wish them to remain. Reflect upon it." D'Artagnan did reflect, and resolved to thrash Planchet in the interim, which was executed with a conscience that D'Artagnan placed in everything. Then, after having well beaten him, he forbade him to leave his service without his permission. "For," added he, "the future cannot fail to mend. I, in inevitably look for better times. Your fortune is therefore made if you remain with me, and I am too good a master to allow you to miss such a chance by granting you the dismissal you require. This manner of acting created much respect for D'Artagnan's policy among the musketeers. Planchet was equally seized with admiration and said no more about going away. The life of the four young men had become common. D'Artagnan, who had no settled habits of his own, as he came from his province into the midst of a world quite new to him, fell easily into the habits of his friends. They rose about 8 o'clock in the winter, about 6 in the summer, and went to take the orderly word and see how things went on at Monsieur de Treville's. D'Artagnan, although he was not a musketeer, performed the duty of one with remarkable punctuality. He went on guard because he always kept company with that one of his friends who mounted his. He was well known at the Hotel of the Musketeers, where everyone considered him a good comrade. Monsieur de Treville, who had appreciated him at the first glance and who bore him a real affection, never ceased recommending him to the king. On their side, the Three Musketeers were much attached to their young comrade. The friendship which united these four men and the want they felt of seeing each other 3 or 4 times a day, whether for duel, business, or pleasure, caused them to be continually running after one another like shadows, and the inseparables were constantly to be met with seeking each other from the Luxembourg to the Place Saint-Sulpice, or from the Rue des Vieux Colombiers to the Luxembourg. In the meanwhile, the promises of Monsieur de Treville went on prosperously. One fine morning, the king commanded Monsieur le Chevalier de Cesarts to admit D'Artagnan as a cadet in his company of guards. D'Artagnan, with a sigh, donned his uniform, which he would have exchanged for that of a musketeer at the expense of 10 years of his existence. But Monsieur de Treville promised this favor of a novitiate of 2 years, a novitiate which might, besides, be abridged if an opportunity should present itself for D'Artagnan to render the king any signal service, or to distinguish himself by some brilliant action. Upon his promise, D'Artagnan retired, and the next day entered upon his duties. Then it became the turn of Athos, Porthos, and Aramis to mount guard with D'Artagnan when he was on duty. By submitting D'Artagnan, the company of Monsieur le Chevalier de Cesarts thus received 4 instead of 1. Chapter 8. A Court Intrigue. In the meantime, the 40 pistoles of King Louis XIII, like all other things of this world, after having had a beginning, had an end, and after this end, our 4 companions began to be somewhat embarrassed. At first, Athos supported the association for a time with his own means. Porthos succeeded him, and thanks to one of these disappearances to which he was accustomed, he was able to provide for the wants of all for a fortnight. At last it became Aramis's turn, who performed it with a good grace, and who succeeded, as he said, by selling some theological books and procuring a few pistols. They then, as they had been accustomed to do, had recourse to Monsieur de Treville, who made some advances on their pay, but these advances could not go far with the Three Musketeers, who were already much in arrears, and a guard who has yet no pay at all. priest, who was his countryman, and one dinner at the house of a cornet of the guards. He took his army to the priests, where they devoured as much provision as would have lasted him for 2 months, and to the cornets, who performed wonders. But, as Blanchett said, people only eat once at a time, even although they eat much. D'Artagnan then felt himself humiliated in having only procured 1 meal and a half for his companions, as the breakfast at the priest's could only be counted as half a repast, in return for the feast which Athos, Porthos, and Aramis had procured him. He fancied himself a burden to the society, forgetting in his perfectly juvenile good faith that he had fed the society for a month, and he set his mind actively to work. He reflected that this coalition of 4 young, brave, enterprising, and active men ought to have some other object than swaggering walks, fencing lessons, and practical jokes more or less sensible. In fact, 4 men, such as they were, 4 men devoted to each other from their purses to their lives, 4 men always supporting each other, never yielding, executing singly or together the resolutions formed in common, 4 arms threatening the 4 cardinal points, or turning toward a single point, must inevitably, either subterraneously in open day by mining in the trench, by cunning or by force, open themselves a way toward the object they wished to attain, however well it might be defended, or however distant it might seem. The only thing that astonished D'Artagnan was that his friends had never yet thought of this. He was thinking alone and seriously racking his brain to find a direction for this single force 4 times multiplied, with which he did not doubt, as with the lever for which Archimedes sought, they should succeed in moving the world. When someone tapped gently at his door, D'Artagnan awakened Blanchett and desired him to go and see who was there. Let not the reader from this phrase, D'Artagnan awakened Blanchett, suppose that it was night, or that the day was not yet come. No, it had just struck 4. Blanchett, 2 hours before, had asked his master for some dinner, and he had answered him with the proverb, "He who sleeps dies." or to induce her and make use of her as a spy. That is all very probable, said D'Artagnan, but the man who has carried her off, do you know him? I have told you that I believe I know him. His name, I do not know that. What I do know is that he is a creature of the cardinals. His time, Dominier. But you have seen him? Yes, my wife pointed him out to me one day. Has he anything remarkable about him, by which he may be recognized? Oh, certainly, he is a noble, of very lofty carriage, black hair, swarthy complexion, piercing eye, white teeth, and a scar on his temple. A scar on his temple, cried D'Artagnan, and with that, white teeth, a piercing eye, dark complexion, black hair, and haughty carriage. Why, that's my man of Mung. He's your man, do you say? Yes, but that has nothing to do with it. No, I was mistaken. That simplifies the matter greatly. On the contrary, if your man is mine, with one blow I shall obtain 2 revenges, that's all. But where is this man to be met with? I cannot inform you. Have you no information respecting his dwelling? None. One day I was conveying my wife back to the Louvre when he was coming out as she was going in, and she showed him to me. Oh, the devil, murmured D'Artagnan. All this is vague enough. From whom did you learn the abduction of your wife? From Monsieur Laporte. Did he give you any of the particulars? He knew none himself. And you have learned none of any other quarter? None from any other quarter? Yes, I have received one. I fear I am committing a great imprudence. You still keep harping upon that. Shh! You still keep harping upon that, but I beg leave to observe to you this time that it is too late now to retreat. I do not retreat, mordieu, cried the bourgeois, swearing to keep his courage up. Besides, by the word of Bonacieux. Your name is Bonacieux, interrupted D'Artagnan. Yes, that is my name. You said then, by the word of Bonacieux. Pardon me for interrupting you, but it appears to me that that name is familiar to me. Very possibly, monsieur, I am your proprietaire. Ah, said D'Artagnan, half rising and half bowing. You are my proprietaire. Yes, monsieur, yes, and as it is 3 months since you came and engaged as you must be in your important occupation, you have forgotten to pay me my rent. As I say, I have not tormented you a single instant. I thought you would appreciate my delicacy. How can it be otherwise, my dear Bonacieux? Replied D'Artagnan. Trust me, I am fully grateful for such conduct, and if, as I have told you, I can be of any service to you, I believe you, monsieur, I believe you. And as I was about to say, by the word of Bonacieux, I have confidence in you. Finish then which you were about to say. The bourgeois took a paper from his pocket and presented it to D'Artagnan. A letter, said the young man, which I received this morning. D'Artagnan opened it, and as the day was beginning to decline, he drew near to the window to read it, and the bourgeois followed him. Do not seek for your wife, said D'Artagnan. She will be restored to you when there is no longer occasion for her. If you make a single step to find her, you are lost. That's pretty positive, continued D'Artagnan, but after all, it is but a threat. Yes, but that threat terrifies me. I am not a man of the sword at all, monsieur, and I am afraid of the Bastille. Said D'Artagnan, I have no greater regard for the Bastille than you, if it were nothing but a sword thrust. I have depended upon you on this occasion, monsieur. You have seen you constantly surrounded by musketeers of a very superb appearance, and knowing that these musketeers belonged to Monsieur de Treville and were consequently enemies of the cardinal, I thought that you and your friends, while rendering justice to our poor queen, would not be displeased at having an opportunity of giving his eminence an ill turn, without doubt. And then I thought that owing me 3 months' rent, which I have said nothing about. Yes, you have already given me that reason, and I find it excellent. Reckoning still further that as long as you do me the honor to remain in my house, that I shall never name business, but more particularly in venturing some funds in the last voyage of the celebrated navigator Jean Moquet, so that you understand, monsieur. But, cried the bourgeois. What? Demanded D'Artagnan. Whom do I see yonder? Where? In the street, fronting your window, in the embrasure of that door, a man enveloped in a cloak. I to see, cried D'Artagnan, and the bourgeois at the same time having each recognized this man. Ah, this time, cried D'Artagnan, springing into his sword, this time he does not escape me. Drawing his sword from the sheath, he rushed out of the apartment. On the staircase he met Athos and Porthos, who were coming to see him. They separated, and D'Artagnan rushed between them like lightning. Where the devil are you going? Cried the two musketeers in a breath. The man of Monk, replied D'Artagnan, and disappeared. D'Artagnan had more than once related to his friends his adventure with the unknown, as well as the apparition of the beautiful foreigner to whom this man had confided some important missive. The opinion of Athos was that D'Artagnan had lost his letter in the skirmish. A gentleman, in his opinion, and according to D'Artagnan's portrait of him, the unknown must be a gentleman. A gentleman would be incapable of the baseness of stealing a letter. Porthos saw nothing in all this but a love meeting given by a lady but to a cavalier, or by a cavalier to a lady, which had been disturbed by the presence of D'Artagnan and his yellow horse. Aramis said that, as these sorts of affairs were mysterious, it was better not to attempt to unravel them. They understood then, from the few words which escaped from D'Artagnan, what affair was in hand, and as they thought, after having overtaken his man or lost sight of him, D'Artagnan would return to his rooms again. They went in. When they entered D'Artagnan's chamber, it was empty. The proprietaire, dreading the consequence of the encounter which was doubtless about to take place between the young man and the unknown, and consistently with the character he had given himself, judged it most prudent to decamp. Okay, chapter 9. D'Artagnan begins to develop himself. As Athos and Porthos had foreseen, at the expiration of half an hour, D'Artagnan returned. He had this time again missed his man, who had disappeared as if by enchantment. D'Artagnan had run, sword in hand, through all the neighboring streets, but had found nobody resembling the man he sought for. Then he did that by which perhaps he ought to have begun, which was to knock at the door against which the unknown was leaning, but it had proved useless to knock 10 or 12 times running, for no one answered, and some of the neighbors who put their noses out of their windows or were brought to their doors by the noise had assured him that that house, all the openings of which were tightly closed, had been for 6 months completely uninhabited. While D'Artagnan was running through the streets and knocking at doors, Aramis had joined his companions, so that, on returning home, D'Artagnan found the meeting complete. "Well," cried the three musketeers all together on seeing D'Artagnan enter with his brow covered with perspiration and his face clouded with anger. "Well," cried he, throwing his sword upon the bed, "this man must be the devil in person. He has disappeared like a phantom, like a shade, like a spectre." "Do you believe in apparitions?" asked Athos of Porthos. I've never believed in anything that I have not seen, and as I have never seen an apparition, I don't believe in them. The Bible, said Aramis, makes our belief in them a law. The shade of Samuel appeared to Saul, and it is an article of faith that I should be very sorry to see any doubt thrown upon Porthos. At all events, man or devil, body or shadow, illusion or reality, this man is born for my damnation. For his flight has caused us to miss a glorious affair, gentlemen, an affair by which there were pistols, and perhaps more to be gained. "How is that?" cried Porthos and Aramis in a breath. As to Athos, faithful to his system of mutism, he satisfied himself with interrogating D'Artagnan by a look. "Planchet," said D'Artagnan to his domestic, who just then insinuated his head through the half-open door in order to catch some fragments of the conversation. Go down to my proprietaire. Monsieur Bonacieux will tell him to send me half a dozen bottles of Beaugency wine. I prefer that." "What, are you in credit with your proprietaire then?" asked Porthos. "Yes," replied D'Artagnan, "from this very day, and mind, if the wine be not good, we will send it to him to find better." "We must use and not abuse," said Aramis sententiously. "I always said that D'Artagnan had the longest head of the four," said Athos, who, after having uttered his opinion, to which D'Artagnan replied with a bow, immediately resumed his habitual silence. "But come, tell us, what is this about?" asked Porthos. "Yes," said Aramis, "impart it to us, my dear friend, unless the honor of any lady to be hazarded by this confidence. In that case, you would do better to keep it up to yourself." "Be satisfied," replied D'Artagnan. "The honor of no one shall have to complain of that which I have to tell you." He then related to his friends, word for word, all that had passed between him and his landlord, and how the man who had carried off the wife of this worthy proprietaire was the same with whom he had had a difference in the upholstery of the French Meunier. "Your affair is not a bad one," said Athos, after having tasted the wine like a connoisseur, and indicated by a nod of his head that he had thought it good. "And 50 or 60 pistols may be got out of this good man. Then there only remains to ascertain whether these 50 or 60 pistols are worth the risk of 4 heads." "But please to observe," cried D'Artagnan, "that there is a woman in the affair, a woman carried off, a woman who is doubtless threatened, tortured perhaps, and all because she is faithful to her mistress." "Beware, D'Artagnan, beware," said Aramis. "You grow a little too warm, in my opinion, about the fate of Madame Bonacieux. Woman was created for our destruction, and it is from her we inherit all our miseries." At this speech of Aramis, the brow of Athos became clouded, and he bit his lips. "It is not Madame Bonacieux about whom I am anxious," cried D'Artagnan, "but the queen whom the king abandons, whom the cardinal persecutes, and who sees the heads of all her friends fall one after the other." Why does she love what we hate most in the world, the Spaniards and the English?" "Spain is her country," replied D'Artagnan, "and it is very natural that she should love the Spanish, who are the children of the same soil as herself. As to the second reproach, I have heard that say that she does not love the English, but an Englishman." "Well, and by my faith," said Athos, "it must be confessed that this Englishman was worthy of being loved. I never saw a woman with nobler air than his." "Without reckoning that he dresses as nobody else can," said Porthos. "I was at the Louvre on the day that he scattered his pearls, and pardieu, I picked up 2 that I sold for 10 pistols each. Do you know him, Aramis?" "As well as you do, gentlemen, for I was among those who seized him in the garden at Amiens, into which Monsieur Putange, the Queen's equerry, introduced me. I was at school at the time, and the adventure appeared to me to be cruel for the king, which would not prevent me," said D'Artagnan, "if I knew where the Duke of Buckingham was, to take him by the hand and conduct him to the Queen, were it only to enrage the cardinal, for our eternal enemy, gentlemen, is the cardinal, and if we could find means to play him a sharp turn, I confess that I would voluntarily risk my head in doing it." "And did the mercer," rejoined Athos, "tell you, D'Artagnan, that the Queen thought that Buckingham had been brought over by a forged letter?" "She is afraid so." "Wait a minute, then," said Aramis. "What for?" demanded Porthos. "Go on, I am endeavoring to remember some circumstances." "And now I am convinced," said D'Artagnan, "that the subduction of the Queen's woman is connected with the events of which we are speaking, and perhaps with the presence of Monsieur de Buckingham in Paris." "The Gascon is full of ideas," said Porthos with administration. I like to hear him talk, said Athos. His patois amuses me. Gentlemen, cried Aramis, listen to this. Listen to Aramis, said his three friends. Yesterday I was at the house of a doctor of theology whom I sometimes consult about my studies. Athos smiled. He resides in a quiet quarter, continued Aramis. His taste and his profession require it. Now, at the moment that I left his house... Here Aramis stopped. Well, cried the auditors, at the moment you left his house. Aramis appeared to make a strong inward effort, like a man who, in the full relation of a falsehood, finds himself stopped by some unforeseen obstacle, but the eyes of his three companions were fixed upon him. Their ears were wide open, and there were no means of retreating. This doctor has a niece, continued Aramis. A very respectable lady, said Aramis. The three friends burst into a loud laugh. If you laugh or doubt what I say, replied Aramis, you shall know nothing. We are as staunch believers as Mohammedans, and as mute as Catafalques, said Athos. I will go then, resumed Aramis. This niece comes sometimes to see her uncle, and by chance was there yesterday at the same time that I was, as I could do no less than offer to conduct her to her carriage. Oh, then this niece of the doctor's keeps a carriage, does she? Interrupted Porthos, one of whose faults was a great incontinence of tongue. A very nice acquaintance, my friend. Porthos, replied Aramis, I have had an occasion to observe to you more than once that you are very indiscreet, and this is injurious to you among the women. Gentlemen, gentlemen, cried D'Artagnan, who began to get a glimpse of the result of the adventures. The thing is serious. Endeavor then not to joke if possible. Go on, Aramis, go on. All at once a tall, dark gentleman, just like yours, D'Artagnan. The same, perhaps, said he. Possibly, continued Aramis, came toward me, accompanied by 5 or 6 men who followed at about 10 paces behind him, and in the politest tone, Monsieur the Duke, said he to me, and you, madam, continued he, addressing the lady who had hold of my arm, the doctor's niece. Hold your tongue, Porthos, said Athos, you are insupportable. Be so kind as to get this carriage, and that without offering the slightest resistance or making the least noises. He took you for Buckingham, cried D'Artagnan. I believe so, replied Aramis, but the lady, asked Porthos. He took her for the queen, said D'Artagnan. Just so, replied Aramis. The Gascon is the devil, cried Athos, and nothing escapes him. The fact is, said Porthos, Aramis is of the same height and something of the shape of the Duke, but it nevertheless appears to me that the uniform of a musketeer. I wore a very large cloak, said Aramis, in the month of July. The devil, said Porthos. Is the doctor afraid you should be recognized? I can comprehend that the spy may have been deceived by the person, but the face. I had a very large hat on, said Aramis. Oh, good Lord, cried Porthos, what precautions to study theology. Gentlemen, gentlemen, said D'Artagnan, do not let us lose our time in jesting. Let us separate and let us seek the mercer's wife. That is the key of the intrigue. A woman of such inferior condition, can you believe so? Said Porthos, protruding his lip with contempt. She is goddaughter to Laporte, the confidential valet of the Queen. Have I not told you so, gentlemen? Besides, it has perhaps been a scheme of Her Majesty to have sought on this occasion for support so lowly. High heads expose themselves sometimes, and the cardinal is far-sighted. Well, said Porthos, in the first place, make a bargain with the mercer, and a good bargain, too. That's useless, said D'Artagnan, for I believe if he does not pay us, we shall be well enough paid by another party. At this moment, a sudden noise of footsteps was heard upon the stairs. The door was thrown violently open, and the unfortunate mercer rushed into the chamber in which the council was held. Save me, gentlemen, save me, cried he. There are 4 men come to arrest me. Save me, for the love of heaven, save me. Porthos and Aramis arose. A moment, cried D'Artagnan, making them a sign to replace their half-drawn swords. On this occasion we don't require courage, we must exercise prudence. And yet, cried Porthos, we will not leave. You will leave D'Artagnan to act as he thinks proper. He has, I repeat, the longest head of the 4, and executing the orders as we have received, asked the one who appeared to be the leader of the party. On the contrary, gentlemen, we would assist you if it were necessary. What does he say? Grumbled Porthos. That you are a simpleton, said Athos. Hold your tongue. But you promised me, said the poor mercer in a very low voice. We can only save you by being free ourselves, replied D'Artagnan in a rapid, low tone, if we appear inclined to defend you, they will arrest us with you. It seems, nevertheless. Come in, gentlemen, come in, said D'Artagnan. I have no motive for defending Monsieur. I saw him today for the first time, and he can tell you on what occasion he came to demand the rent of my lodging. Is not that true, Monsieur Bonacieux? Yes, sir. That's very true, cried the mercer, but Monsieur does not tell you. Silence with respect to me, silence with respect to my friends, silence about the Queen above all, or you will ruin everybody without saving yourself. Now, gentlemen, you are at liberty to take away this man. And D'Artagnan pushed the half-stupefied mercer among the guards, saying to him, You are a shabby old fellow, my dear. You come to demand money of me, of a musketeer, to prison with him. Gentlemen, once more, take him to prison and keep him under key as long as possible. That will give me time to pay him. The sbirri were full of thanks and took away their prey. At the moment they were going down, D'Artagnan laid his hand on the shoulder of their leader. Shall I not have the pleasure of drinking to your health and you to mine, said D'Artagnan, filling 2 glasses with the Beaugency wine which had been obtained from the liberality of Monsieur Bonacieux. That will do me great honor, said the leader of the sbirri, and I consent thankfully. Then to yours, Monsieur, what is your name? Beausrenard, Monsieur Beausrenard. To yours, my good sir, in your turn, what is your name, if you please? D'Artagnan. To yours, Monsieur D'Artagnan. And above all others, cried D'Artagnan, as if carried away by his enthusiasm to that of the king and the cardinal. The leader of the sbirri would perhaps have doubled the sincerity of D'Artagnan if the wine had been bad, but the wine was good, and he was convinced. Why, what a devil of a villainy have you performed there, said Porthos when the alguazil-in-chief had rejoined his companions, and the 4 friends were left alone. Shame, shame for 4 musketeers to allow an unfortunate devil who cried out for help to be arrested from among them, and a gentleman to hobnob with a bailiff. Porthos, said Aramis, Athos has already told you, you are a simpleton, and I am quite of his opinion. D'Artagnan, you are a great man, and when you occupy Monsieur de Treville's place, I will come and ask your influence to secure me an abbey. Well, I am quite lost, said Porthos. Do you approve of what D'Artagnan has done? Parbleu, indeed I do, said Athos. If I not only approve of what he has done, but I congratulate him upon it. And now, gentlemen, said D'Artagnan, without stopping to explain his conduct to Porthos, all for one, one for all, that is our device, is it not? And yet, said Porthos, hold out your hand and swear, cried Athos and Aramis at once, overcome by example, grumbling to himself. Nevertheless, Porthos stretched out his hand, and the 4 friends repeated with one voice the formula dictated by D'Artagnan. All for one and one for all. That is well. Now let everyone retire to his own home, said D'Artagnan, as if he had done nothing but command all his life and attention, for from this moment we are at feud with the cardinal. I hope you enjoyed tonight's reading video, and I hope you got some